And happy Tuesday, Xavier fans. Thursday. I'm getting my podcast mixed up here. This is your weekly Razor cast, all things Muskie basketball. And Razor is the Reaker and Zink, talking about Xavier. So we'll start today, as we always do, saying welcome to Jim Reaker, our resident Xavier expert. Jim, how's things going for you?
Oh, pretty good, Jeff. March Madness has actually begun with the conference tournaments. The Big East tournament, of course, kicked off yesterday in New York City, and the Xavier Musketeers are still alive, so things are looking good this morning.
That's good. That's good, and that's one of the things we'll talk about here. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about the Big East prospects in the tournament, in particular those of the Muskies, and what last night's win they mean. But we'll start today's program with talking about the regular season, and it's been a bumpy one for the Muskies. There's been some highs, there's been some lows. So before we talk about tournament and Xavier's prospects, let's just sort of reflect back on the year and ask Jim what you think your top three highs and your top three lows were from the regular season.
Well, let's start with the lows so we can end on a high note, and I'll go in backward order. My third low of the year, I think, was the loss to Creighton at home. We've talked about all year long how the Cintas Center is such an advantage for the Musketeers, and that we'd hoped that they could maybe stay perfect. Of course, that didn't happen, and, of course, that loss to Creighton, which, if you recall, that was the end of that three-game stretch, Villanova, Butler, Creighton, where we're like, man, if we could just win one of those, we'd be in good shape. And when we lost that third one to Creighton at home, I thought that was a real downer. Number two on my list would be the six-game losing streak culminating with the home loss to Marquette. Remember, that's what we started our show out last week right after that game. And remember, I thought that was I used the words that maybe the wheels have come off and the Musketeers are in free fall, and this is getting ugly and might get even uglier. So that was number two. And number one, I think all Musketeer fans would agree, the number one low of the year, of course, was the injury to Edmund Sumner, which has had a huge impact on this team and just everything about the season. And so those are my lows. Anything you want to comment on those, or anything you wish to add?
As we've talked about many times, Jim, it is difficult because and I don't want to preclude your highs here, but expectations were so high for the Muskies coming in at the preseason poll at number 7 in the country that everything seems a low beyond that, and those are minor things. They still performed well. The lows, are there. That loss streak was ugly. And, of course, everything has changed since Sumner's been out. So I can't say anything one way or another except to say that, it's one of those things that you look at it and you go, well, if that's the worst thing that happened, we're still in pretty good shape except for poor Edmund, who was really coming into shape as one of the stars of the Muskies, and we'll look forward to having him back next year.
Well, I did something, too, I want to share with the fans, just to remember, of course, the Sumner injury is the one that, everybody believes has changed the whole complexion of the season. But let's go back. I could list 7 things, and probably some Xavier fans will have forgotten about some things that have happened, and actually some not so dyed-in-the-wool Xavier fans might not even know of a couple things that happened. We go back to last summer. It all started with Miles Davis being arrested for the breaking of his girlfriend's phone, and what that all brought about, and the fact that he was not going to be around for at least the first semester of the season. Then this is the one that probably a lot of people forget or maybe not even aware of. Xavier had recruited a young man named Eddie Ekiyor out of Canada. He was a 6'9" post player. He actually came to Xavier second semester last year. Now, here was the issue. He had some legal issues. He actually had an incident where he had hit a policeman on a bicycle up in Canada, and he left the scene of the accident for whatever reason. So that was hanging over his head. maybe the reason why Xavier actually got him, because some big programs maybe backed away from him because of his legal issues. But he did decide to come to Xavier last year, and he practiced with the team in the second semester, and it looked like he was going to be a contributor. In fact, some of the scouting places had listed him as a 4-star, but he left in early August for whatever reason. Actually, reading some of the accounts, that it seems like the accident still weighed heavily on him emotionally, felt guilty about it, and he needed his family for some emotional support. So that's why he returned home. But again, a big post player that could have been an impact player. Then you probably forget that Kaiser Gates didn't even start the season playing. Remember, he had a minor knee issue and had to have some minor surgery and didn't join, or actually wasn't ready for play, I think, until about the 10th game of the season. Then, of course, we all know that we went through the roller coaster of Miles Davis showing up, and what was he going to bring, and this was going to be the one thing they needed to get over the hump. And then, of course, within a week or so, he had left. Then, of course, you had Edmund Sumner injury at the Gardens against St. John's, and then followed up by Blewett's injury, which he fought through the first time, but then the second time re-injured it and had to sit out a few games and that's probably the low point of the season, because without Blewett and Sumner, the team really looked lost. And then, just Saturday, of course, they had suffered the injury of Tariq Jones, who had been giving them some quality minutes and actually had been starting inside. And he, of course, is under concussion protocol. We hope to see him tonight, but we're not sure about it. So, again, this has been, you talk about Chris Mack's just got to be thinking, what's next? And I want to give him kudos for the way he's managed it, because, Chris is sometimes very, very emotional. But throughout these very, very tough times, even in the last 2 games, Xavier was down by 11 points up in Chicago. It could have gone real bad there, but they fought back, of course, with a 14-point win. And again, last night, the first half, I think at one point they missed 7 shots in a row, and Trayvon Blewett didn't score in the first half. But when he was interviewed at halftime, he said, we're fine. We'll play better second half, and we'll win this game. So I give him credit for dealing with all the adversity the best he could.
Well, then, after a very thorough listing of lows and things they've worked through, what are your highs?
Highs. Number 3 high would be the win at Creighton, because Creighton is a very, very tough place to win. And, of course, we were kind of on even ground there because we had lost Sumner, but they had also lost Mo Watson at the time. And going into that building, getting a win there, and it looked like, okay, we'll be okay without Sumner. Things are going to be okay. And Quentin Gooden, I think, played a good game that day. So that was a very, very uplifting high. Second high came very, very early in the season, is when they went to Florida and won the Tire Pro Invitational down in Orlando. Of course, that was supposed to be the Puerto Rican tip-off, but of course it had been moved because of the Zika virus concerns. And, of course, I have to list that as a high because I was there and had a great time down there. But the number 1 high, I think, is, and some people forget this, but going back, they started the non-conference or finished the non-conference part of their schedule 13-2, and at that time were ranked 7th in the nation. And, of course, I think Xavier fans at that time had a lot of optimism of how far this team could go. I'm sure many were thinking another Final 8 appearance or Elite 8 or maybe even a Final 4. But, of course, the negatives outweighed the positives this year, and now we're just trying to play on every day.
Well, that brings us to our next topic then, which is beyond the Big East tournament, which of course they'll go against Butler today. Let's talk about these things a little bit. They won last night. They beat DePaul back-to-back, some pretty convincing wins, but it is DePaul. And does that mean they're in the NCAA tournament, or do they need a strong showing, or maybe even need to beat Butler tonight to go on? I'll just say this first. I think it's going to be very, very difficult for the Muskies to win or even get to the final game of the Big East tournament, and not because I lack their guts or talent, but one of the things we talked about all year is the number of minutes our kids are putting in, and some of our guys are putting in 38, 40 minutes, and now that we have a short bench, it's a little different when you've got to play 4 straight days in order to do that. So I'm not looking past Butler to see what you think, where they stand right now. Are they in, or do they need to represent tonight in order to convince the committee they belong in the 68?
I think they're in. Even if they lose to Butler, maybe the only thing that could really make us really nervous, and I'm going to be nervous on Sunday if they do lose to Butler, even if it's a 1 or 2 point game, but if they would get blown out by Butler, which I don't think will happen, just the style of play that Butler plays, they don't necessarily blow teams out. They always play a lot of close games because they play a lot of slow possessions to kind of, stay in control of the game and not let teams get big runs on them. So I think they're in no matter what happens tonight. You look at their numbers, and, of course, Coach Mack made a plea to the media a couple of days ago, look at our strength of schedule and look at our RPI and our BPI. And I looked them up this morning, and, of course, in some of them I don't think had included the DePaul game from last night. But the latest numbers I have, and, of course, these are always fluid at this time of the year as games are going to start here in another hour in some conference tournaments. But right now the strength of schedule, which, of course, the committee has always said is a very, very important. It's still at 18, and that's very, very good. Their RPI this morning was 32. Their BPI is 36. And, of course, Shannon Russell, who covers the Xaviers, she did a little bit of research, and she said since 2011, and that's when the tournament went to 68, no team with an RPI below 40 with 20 wins has been excluded from the tournament. And, of course, the Xavier Musketeers with that 20th win last night, they meet that criteria. So I think they're in. Again, a big blowout by Butler tonight might put questions back in people's minds. I think a win over Butler tonight, I think, pretty much assures them a bid for the tournament.
You bring up some good points, and we've been bringing them up all along. Of course, like you said, the situation is fluid, and a lot of things are going to depend upon upsets in conference tournaments, teams that the committee wasn't counting on. Is the old phrase sort of goes: if you're looking at the tournament going into your conference tournament, you're probably okay. The only thing you can really do in the conference tournament is play your way in. So if there's some big upsets somewhere, and that means that they want to include somebody who didn't make their conference, which would push the ACC to a 10th or 11th team or something like that. Those are things we can't control. I would say right now, if they had to pick, they're probably in. Joe Lunardi, who I've referred to all season just to make it consistent, has them still in that play-in game on Tuesday, which will work against them a little bit. But we'll just mention some of the things that do work against the Muskies, which is they is the committee going to go 7 deep in the Big East? X was only 500 in their conference, and the other teams that they're considering, the Marquettes and the Seton Halls and the Providences, they all ended up beating the Muskies. And one of the things the committee does consider is that play down the stretch. And the Muskies in the last 12 games, they were 6-6, but 3 of those games were against DePaul. Which how much are those going to be counted? And when you look at other things, when you look at top 50 wins, I mean, top 25 wins, they're only 1-7. They're only 3-8 against the top 50. And the big win in the top 25 was against Creighton, whose cachet has dropped quite a bit over time. They ended up being a 6th seed in the Big East tournament when Xavier was 7. So there's a lot of that. They do have the strong RPI and the BPI. It's just a matter of how things shake out through the rest of the time as they go through. I think the big thing that's working against them is they really don't have those signature victories. They did beat a Wake Forest team early in the year that looks like they could play their way into the tournament. They do have that win against Creighton, but their other wins against even the top 100 teams aren't all that impressive, and they were all at home, whereas they struggled with losses on the road. So just to sort of balance the scales and see what the committee is looking at. I'm with you. I think they're in, but I think they're barely in. I think even I don't think the loss to Butler, no matter what it is tonight, is going to weigh all that heavily. But a good showing against Butler, either a win or a very tight game, which they've already played them twice pretty tightly, would show the committee that they're definitely tournament worthy.
Well, and here's the thing. The one thing people talk about, you just mentioned they have no really big wins, but on the other side of the coin, they don't have any bad losses. That the committee looks at that also. And actually think about this. Probably if they would happen to beat Butler tonight, that'd probably be their biggest win of the year. And, of course, that would, I think, that's why I think that would definitely put them in. And here's something, watching conference tournaments through the years, sometimes, I don't know if it wouldn't pay dividends down the road as the tournament goes on, but sometimes that team that plays a game and the other team has a bye because they've been in the arena, they've been in the situation, they've got things flowing. Sometimes they play better than the team that got the bye and was just sitting around waiting to play. I know back in the Big East, you may recall, and the ACC's doing this now too, they give the top 4 teams the double bye. That was almost a death. I think in the Big East, it seemed like almost every year one of the teams that got the double bye got beat. And a lot of times it was because the team they were playing had played 2 games and had 2 victories and had things flowing. Again, it's going to come to an end probably if the Musketeers do get on a little bit of a run, but playing that 4th game in a row, although we go back to 2008, I believe, 2004, 2008, when they made that great run in the NCAA. They won 4 games up at Dayton in a row and then continued that hot string into the NCAA tournament to make it all the way to the Final 8. So actually, I think that was 2004. I'm confused on that right now. So now going back to the Big East, I think they're going to get 7. Although here's what's, and you kind of alluded to it, here's what's weird about the Big East. Creighton, most people have as a lock, is the number 6 seed in the tournament, whereas Providence, Seton Hall, and Marquette, who all have higher seeds in the tournament, are supposedly on the bubble. And probably the best thing that happened, and this is going to sound weird, the best thing that happened for the Big East was Mo Watson and Edmund Sumner getting hurt, because that allowed the Seton Hall, Providence, Marquette of the world, of the Big East, to get some big victories against them and pull back into it. If Sumner and Watson stay healthy, I think Creighton might be a Final Four contender. I think Xavier's definitely a Sweet 16. And I think those 2 are right at the top with Butler and Villanova. And the other 3 that are now on the bubble, or 4 actually, probably 2 of them wouldn't even be in consideration right now. So kind of a strange way that the Big East has developed this year. Again, I think they're going to get 7 just because of the parity that came about because of the 2 major injuries.
Well, and that sort of talks about it. I mean, they've got a lot of things going for them as a league, but how far can they go? This is when you look at Nova, obviously is probably going to get a number 1 seed. You mentioned the big 4 from before: Creighton and Butler and Nova and Xavier. Xavier right now, and I'm looking at Joe Lenardi's bracketology. He's got Creighton as a number 7 seed. He's got Marquette as a number 10. Seton Hall as a number 10. Got Xavier in the play-in game, and I must have skimmed over it. I'm looking for Butler here. And
Butler, I think, it's a 4 or 5 maybe.
Well, right now he's got Butler as a 3, and Butler made that strong run. And that's 6, so that's leaving out Providence. I think he does have Providence in as well. Let me see where I skipped over, but it comes down to a lot of things, like in one of the other games, a great Illinois State team lost in their conference title. A lot of people want them in. There's a UT Arlington that right now probably deserves to be in, but if they don't win their conference there in I think it's the Sun Belt, or will they also give them a bid? Nevada. That's what I mean. It'll come down to some of those things. These teams on the bubble, whether or not they have space for them, depending upon the other teams that they feel are worthy that might not make it through their tournament. So I just found that Providence he's got as a 10. So right now he's got 7 Big Easters in, but we'll see where it comes on Sunday. And there's always surprises on Sunday. You just never know what it's going to go. But, you sort of alluded to it. Do you think that Creighton is in the best position to make a run? Nova, obviously, we'll talk about them on Tuesday about their chances to repeat. But do you think that Creighton now is in a better position to make the run than a team like Butler, which very recently beat Villanova?
Well, here's what I'm going to say, and this is going to sound like a homer statement, and maybe it is for the Big East, but I think the Big East is probably the second best conference in the country, and I think that you're going to see the Big East teams do very well in the NCAA because of the grinder that they've been put through. Remember, they're one of the few conferences that plays a true double schedule of everybody. So you've seen everybody on the road, you've seen everybody at home, and I think they'll do very, very well. The Big East is a tough conference, a very physical conference, and that was shown yesterday when the 8 and 9 seeds, St. John's and Georgetown, almost went at it. Their coaches almost went at it. And I think this is when you'll see the payoff. And again, think about this. You're talking about 10 and 11 seeds of a lot of those teams. Well, they're playing 7 and 8 seeds probably. I think that's the way that matches up. So they're not going to be playing teams that are really highly that seeded in the first round. So I'm going to make this statement. I think the Big East will go 5-2, 6-1 if they get the 7 in the first round. Now, will they have? It might be only 2 that advance to the Sweet 16 because, again, that's when you start to have to play those really higher seeds and some of those elite teams to get into the Sweet 16. But I think the Big East will do very, very well in the initial round of the NCAA, and I think they can attribute that to the quality of the conference and the type of play that the conference plays. And, as you've already seen it last night, I think, or I've watched games, they're letting more physical play letting it play on. They're not calling as many fouls across the board, and that seems to always happen as we get closer to the NCAA tournament. In fact, that 2004 run, if you've ever seen the video run, the third game that Xavier played, the one that got him to the Final 8, I think it was against Texas A&M, and they recorded the conference between the captains at midcourt, and the referee said, right to the captain, said, "We're going to let them play today. Make sure your big guys know that," meaning it's going to be physical, and we're going to let it be physical, and I think that happens every year, and I think that'll really help the Big East. I mean, think about Angel Delgado, how he's going to go off against somebody that hasn't seen a force like that all year long.
Well, you're definitely true. When you're playing tough teams, and that's what we talked about on Tuesday in our Trogcast, and we'll be able to talk more about the whole field on our Trogcast on Tuesday. But, looking at it, and again, I'm looking at one of the best predictors is Joe Lunardi from ESPN. And the only thing you've got to watch, I agree with you that they're playing those higher seeds, but like right now he's got Seton Hall playing the Maryland team from the Big Ten, and he's got Xavier playing Syracuse in the play-in game. And then whoever wins that's got to play Minnesota from the Big Ten. The Big Ten's down. Marquette's slated to play Miami from the ACC. Providence, Oklahoma State, so that is the problem. You're going to get some less seeds, but they're not playing, at least right now, some of those teams that are in the lesser conferences. They do have Butler going up against Akron from the MAC, which should be okay, and Villanova playing another one of the playing games between Mount St. Mary's, which is playing a really tough schedule in North Carolina Central. So, I agree with you that it does get down to that, but sometimes those 7, 10, 8, 9 teams are some of the toughest teams to beat in the tournament as well. So we'll see. You're saying 5-2, 6-1 in the first round. We're going to get at least 2 to the Sweet 16. We'll be able to check that in a couple of weeks, and we'll talk about all the matchups that we know about next Thursday when we come back to you for our pre-tournament Razorcast. We'll be able to talk to you about the final run here in the Big East tournament and also go over the NCAA tournament. And we might already know where Xavier stands if they end up having to play one of those play-in games on Tuesday. So we're going to wish the Muskies the best tonight against Butler. And however things go, I would imagine if some odd thing happens, if they don't get in the NCAA, they would certainly accept an NIT bid, and they'll be able to play some tournament basketball. We can keep talking about Muskies into close to April. Any final thoughts? Your trivia and tidbits.
The unfortunate thing about if they, and I don't even want to go down this road, but if they would play in the NIT, which sometimes, again, we talked about last night. The good thing about last night, that was a team effort. The scoring was very, very balanced, and Quentin Gooden maybe had one of his best games of the year. The last 2 DePaul games, I've kind of got the feeling they've started out tight, like they knew they had to win the game and didn't perform, and then they got to a point where they got behind, and then they kind of just played a lot looser, like, hey, we need to just start playing here. And that's when you had McCura go off, and Blewett, of course, scored 17, all of his points in the second half, and he started making other people better. And you saw Quentin Gooden, you see some of the things that he can do when he drives the lane, and, that guy just gets better and better, I think, every game he plays. Of course, he still has those freshman moments when he makes a mistake. So, it's going to be interesting. It's fun to watch. True Xavier fans are going to – but here's the point I was going to make. If they are in the NIT, they will not play at the Cintas Center because renovations on the Cintas Center have actually already begun. In fact, there was one scenario where people were thinking if they were in the NIT, maybe the NIT would match them up against NKU, Northern Kentucky University, and they would play over at NKU, and Xavier fans would have access to go into that game very easily. But, of course, we know the Norse screwed that up because they got an NCAA bid themselves. So that won't happen.
Well, just one comment on the DePaul games. I don't know if they came out tight so much as they just ran into the force of Billy Garrett Jr., and you got to send a shout-out to him. This is a guy who's been a star at DePaul for 4 years, had to switch coaches. Fantastic players, had some health issues, and has played through them, could very well be playing his last game in basketball. But he just desperately wanted to pull his team up and started very strong, but just didn't have the support around him. And I think he's one of the unsung stars of the Big East this year when you watch him play. It's just Coach Latos didn't have enough coming into his second year to build on with him, and we wish him good luck. I think that was more him trying to push his team to heights they weren't able of scaling rather than the Muskies being tight. At least that's my opinion. But what have you got for me in terms of your fun little trivia questions?
All right, today's topic is your first question. This should be good. Now, you understand that for our fans, Jeff is a Bearcat and Musketeer fan, so sometimes his Musketeer trivia is a little bit weak. But first of all, the topic today is 1961, because as Musketeer fans know, Jeff, what happened in 1961?
That was their first game in the NCAA tournament ever.
Very, very good. Plus, the other significant thing that happened in 1961.
They had to watch their crosstown rivals, Cincinnati Bearcats, win it all.
That was one of my questions down the road, so you got that one before I even asked it. No, I was born. That was the answer to that question.
Oh, that is the key to Muskie trivia today, that Jim Reaker came into the world as a Muskie fan from northwestern Indiana via Ball State before. Okay, we'll go with that. You knew even then you were born blue.
All right. Here's the key question today. This is a couple follow-ups, although one follow-up you just already who actually won in 1961. Of course, you're proving your Bearcat loyalty there that was the first national championship for the Bearcats. But next question is, who was the opponent of the Musketeers in their first ever NCAA tournament game? And, of course, this was only 3 years after they had won the NIT, and we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Do you know who the opponent was in that first NCAA game without Googling it?
I do, because I had this as part of my little tidbits to throw out because it's a big week for Xavier. And that was Morehead State, whom they beat 71-61 just down here in Kentucky.
All right, that's good. And a follow-up on that, do you know where that game was played? In the Mideast Regional that year, and each regional had 6 teams in it. This is when the tournament only had 24 bids. Do you know where that game was played? Very close to home.
It was close. Again, I think we're in a mind meld here because I looked up a lot of these things just for my tidbits part, but it was in Louisville, Kentucky was the Mideast.
The old Freedom Hall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's the stumper. Do you know what date it was played on?
March 14th.
All right,
I didn't have to Google it because I Googled it earlier to get ready. You just happened to run into the buzzsaw today.
Once again, Jeff, I give you accolades for doing your homework. I'll give you that's an A+ today. You got an A+.
I would say finally. Usually I get like 9 out of 10 right, and you give me an A-. And now, finally, Mr. Reaker was always a tough grader, boys and girls. You got to be careful with him there. You have to earn it with Mr. Reaker. So that's great.
All right. So what do you got for us?
We got a few fun things. Like I said, it's a big week in terms of tournaments for Xavier. It was, during this week, and again, we got project that we're not going to be on the air until March 16th, but March 14th was their first game ever in the NCAA tournament. And as we talked about with Dale Harmon, they didn't go back to the tournament for 22 years. And it was then that Bob Stack got their squad back, even though they lost in the first round to Alabama, 97-80. And they wouldn't get their first win until 4 years later, and on March 12th of 1987, Pete Gillen's Hoopsters upset Missouri 70-69 in a game that was played right here in what's now called the U.S. Bank Arena, but then was called Riverfront Coliseum. And also in Xavier history, Jim alluded to it earlier in the broadcast, it was March 11th of 2004 that Xavier had one of its 4 wins against the number 1 team when they upset St. Joseph's, blew them out 87-67 in the A-10 tournament, and that was a year that they won the A-10 tournament and made a healthy run in the NCAAs. You want to say something about the tourney games there, Jim?
The tourney games?
It seemed like you were going to say something, and I trampled over you.
Nope. If I was, I forgot what I was going to say. Okay. 2 really old guys forget.
We're 2 really old guys. Sometimers disease sometimes kicks in. Okay, and a couple of nice little tidbits. Also, it's on this date, 1996, we lost the legendary comedian and Oscar-winning actor George Burns at the age of 100. So good night, Gracie, to George. It seems like he was around forever, and probably is, but it doesn't seem like it's been 21 years. And also on this date in 1943, the world welcomed Robert James Fischer, better known as Bobby. This enigmatic character became the first U.S. Grandmaster to win the World Chess Championship when he defeated Boris Spassky in 1972. There's a couple of great documentaries. Jim's favorites are the 30 for 30. There's one on Bobby Fischer, who many consider to have been the best chess player of all time. Very wacky personality. But another reason that I bring it up, not only because chess is a sport that's not out there, people may consider it, but Fischer was the first one that considered the physical toll on sitting for long periods and playing a mental game. And he brought a regimen of physical fitness and diet to prepare for many of his games. And it's pretty much standard in the chess world today. And he, of course, passed away in 2008 as an emigre from his host country of the United States. But quite a guy, and if you get the chance to see any of those documentaries. They're very informative about the age and chess and Bobby Fischer. We'll be back with you next week for our Razorcast, and we'll be talking about a lot of things for Xavier and the Big East come tournament time. And, of course, please join us on Tuesday because we'll have a lot to say. We'll know what the bracket is. We'll be able to announce how we did on our challenge from last week from the Trialcast where we picked our conferences, bids, and tourney winners. And Jim and I will put in our secret ballots for who's going to make the Sweet 16, and that'll be our next challenge as we work through. As always, we thank our fans for being with us, and we're going to wish the Muskies lots of luck tonight against the Butler Bulldogs as they try to play their way solidly into the NCAA tournament.
Just a reminder for fans, it's a 7 p.m. tip tonight. I'm not sure it'll be on one of the Fox channels, I'm sure, probably FS1. But a 7 p.m. tip in Madison Square Garden, and we'll just end it like we always do, saying, Go Muskies!